Welcome to Behind the Baton number 8. What a pleasure to be with you. And I'm lucky enough to have corralled my son Julian to be with us again. Today we're going to talk mostly about left hand. Of course it's the cello, but it applies to all the string instruments. And as it applies to all the string instruments, of course it applies to tremendous influence a conductor can have in an orchestra, because the conductor is more responsible for the string sound than for the wind or brass sound. The first oboe or the first trumpet come in, they sound the way they sound. You can make a little suggestion here or there, but basically it is the way it is. With strings, you can actually change the whole way an orchestra sounds by making suggestions, if they're willing to accept your suggestions. But before we do that, there were some good questions that came in after our last session, which was about bowing mostly. Obviously, it was not with as much depth as we could have, because there's a lot of strokes that we didn't approach, but we did. I think we got through the fundamental stuff pretty well. So the one question is about unified bowing or free bowing. So just to explain what that means, you all know that unified bowing means everybody bows in the same direction. You know, when the concertmaster's down bow, the whole section's down bow, and the second violins try to imitate, and they all try to do it in a similar way. Now, that said, you have to understand that the bass bow is a lot shorter than the violin bow and with a cello bow, and sometimes you can't just automatically have the cellos and the basses always bow the same way. Some conductors really want them always to bow the same way, and then others are more flexible, as I am. But the question is about unified bowing versus, now free bowing means everybody just bows any way they want. You want to jump in with this, Julian, or should I?
Yeah, well, free bowing is usually meant for very rich sounds, so that no string player ever feels restricted by the amount of bow he or she has left. You know, so if you're playing a long note and then you get to the tip and you still have a lot more time to spend, if you don't distribute in the right way, you could get cramped. So free bowing says if you're playing this note and you're running the bow, go in the opposite direction, so you can continue the sound. If a whole string section is playing like that, then it creates a lot more resonance. Before we were chatting a little bit before the session, you mentioned Barber Adagio for strings, where it's really needed to have this long, sustained sound that the whole section produces. And if everybody's trying to save bow, then it strips the resonance. So free bowing is sort of at everybody's leisure.
The question is, why don't, I played for many years with Leopold Stokowski. He insisted on free bowing always. His idea was, first of all, he always would say, understand the bow. So if it was off the string, you're playing at a certain part of the bow, and he'd say, you have to understand, you must play this at the frog, or the middle, or the tip, whatever he would say. But he didn't care what direction you went in. Up or down didn't matter to him. And in fact, if he saw players bowing in the same direction, he would call them out. And, use your brain, be independent, independent thinking. I remember the voice of screaming at Carnegie Hall, independent thinking. Anyway, so why would we? Okay, so when you bow together, it looks good.
Yes.
There's no question. You see all 18, 16 first violins bowing together. Wow, it's impressive. What are the other obvious reasons for doing it together?
Well, obvious reasons is that the bow has tendencies, as we talked about in the last section. And technically speaking, the ideal string player in the abstract it won't matter which direction you go in or how fast your bow is or whatever is happening, because you can make it all sort of sound the same. So if I were to play all down bow at the frog, technically I should try to make it similar up bow at the tip. But you can tell it's not quite the same. In an ideal world, and that's why we practice so much, is to make sure that we can do anything and have it sound the same. But the majority of us still are influenced by the tendencies of the bow. So if you play something at the front, it will naturally be stronger than if you play something at the tip. If you want a whole string section to make a diminuendo, more likely that it will sound more natural on the down bow to make the diminuendo than on an up bow, where you have to have a lot more bow control to hold up this part of the bow. So that's really the conductor and the concertmaster's decision making to give the right idea, so that even if someone makes a mistake, the tendency of the bow will be correct. Also, I've played on a lot of very small stages, and this might sound funny, but if everybody's going in a different direction and you have very little space to play, then you'll be hitting each other. And you hit the knee, and you hit the instrument, and anyway. So.
Then a part of this question came from Brian Higgins. Good question, Brian Higgins. Is it easier sometimes if the conductor, concertmaster, principal, whoever, is figuring out a bowing that may make the passage go more easily? So that's another reason why. So someone has spent the time to figure it out. I think that's pretty good. Anyway, so I think we've covered that pretty well.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the left hand. Now, again, we're dealing with the cello, but it applies to most of the string instruments. Let's start with shifts. Everybody knows about positions, but let's go through it anyway. First, second, third, fourth. Give me some example of the different positions on the fingerboard.
Right, so the fingerboard is fretless and has no indications whatsoever as to where one would put his or her fingers. So there are these positions that a lot of string players learn, which is different orientations of the hand on the fingerboard. And there are certain pillars of each, and each instrument varies, whereas you can play a larger space of notes on the violin because it's smaller. The cello requires more positions. The bass requires even more positions. Usually the cellist can play 3 notes with 1 position. A bass player can play 2 notes. The violin can play 4 notes.
So just give me an example of anything. A couple of notes played in the first position, third position, on the different strings. So anything.
The same notes over and over, the same notes in each string?
Yeah.
So the open string, if I'm playing, I'm starting on an open A string and playing in the first position. On the D string, to play the same notes, you would be what's called the 4th position. Right? On the lower strings, it'd be much higher.
And if you notice, every time you do that, it's a different color.
Yes.
So the first version is brighter, and each subsequent version is less bright.
Right.
And as a result, sometimes we conductors, the leaders of the section, will specify what string to play something on just because of the color, because of the change of color.
And as a conductor, it's important to note where the open strings are for each player, because the lowest note that can be played on each string is the open string. So you should never ask the string section to play a lower note than the open string on that particular string. It's important to so the A is the lowest note I can play on the A string, but then I can play it here on the D string, and here on the G string, and much higher on the C string.
Good. Okay. Now, getting from one position to the next requires some kind of a shift, right?
Right.
So tell us about shifts.
Well, when playing a passage that requires more notes than you can play in one particular position, you need to travel along the fingerboard, and there are many ways that you can do this. In American or orchestral playing, it's expected that you will try to move your hand to and from different positions with the least amount of extraneous noise possible. So shifting meaning just moving your hand as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So so the moment I shift is going from the first position to the 4th position, or from any position to another, and I'm trying to go as quickly and as deliberately as possible. So there's a quick motion, so I don't get extra sounds. That said, if you don't try to do that, you go a little slower, there's a glissando or a slide of some sort, which when the slides are used to shift for technical reasons, they are it's not as I think effective as if they are used for musical reasons.
So in other words, if you want to make a slide between the shift, do it for a musical reason rather than because you can't do it otherwise.
Right. The best way to avoid extraneous noise in a shifting scenario when you're moving your hand is to change the bow. So if I went, there's the moment when the bow moves in the opposite direction that if it's timed well, that it will disguise the shift, and that can go for anything, as opposed to it.
Yeah. Well, you do pretty well, man.
Well, but it's more of a jump.
All right, let's take these notes now, and let's talk a little bit about slides. So let's say musically, it's a moment where you want to slide from one to the next. Okay, just give me an example of any kind. We'll discuss different slides, but do one kind of slide, a musical slide.
Okay, so
Now do a different version. So what the two different versions are, one is you're sliding into the note, the next is you're landing at the top note. So do it slow motion for us, would you?
So the underslide or the Russian slide is when you use the finger that you're going to play the note with to make the glissando. So if I'm going from the first finger to the third finger, right? The overslide or the French slide is when I use the older finger that I'm not going to play the note with to make the slide, and then put the new finger only when I reach it within the position. So the Russian slide is more expressive because you have the complete ascension, but the French slide gets the more of the beginning of the note because you actually have a clear start. So if you want to slide to a note that per se has an accent on it, it's much more easily achieved than if you go, because then you have to do it mostly with the bow. But if you want something very, very sentimental, then the Russian slide is probably the best option. For orchestral playing, it should be noted that the French slide is much easier for most because there is an element of going to a position. So if there's a moment that I know that when my first finger gets to a certain note, then if I put my third finger down, it will be that note. The key in the French slide is to make sure that you don't stop on that preparing note, because then you'll get an extra note instead of right.
And just what I use is that French slide most of the time. Interesting, more with violins than with cellos. With cello, I like the Russian slide because it's what cellists like, it seems to me, and it's very expressive.
That's what I like. So.
Oh, is that it? You influenced me. Oh, it's all your fault. Now, what about going the other direction? What about going down?
So going down is the same exact thing. So if I went, that's I guess the inverse. There would be the Russian, which I'm using the new finger to slide down, or what's most common is using the French on the way down. Right.
Right.
This is only when you're going two different notes. So when you're using the same different fingers, if you're using the same finger, you have no choice but to do a Russian slide because you're not actually changing your finger. So, or is the same as opposed to.
Now, what about like a whole step? Just a whole step slide up or down.
So the whole step slide, right, can be done in a variety of different ways. It can be done with the same finger. It can be done as a French slide, where there's that change. Then it can be done as a Russian slide, which changing your fingers. Or it can be done more slyly as you slowly put down a group of fingers. So, like that. So if you sort of do like a cat-like motion where you slowly put down your fingers, you can can make a slide that way.
Would you do something like the Bruch Kodadre, some of the slides, you know, as with slides?
Yeah, so that's a slow slide with the same finger, and then to demonstrate a different type, that would be a French slide downward, because I'm going a certain distance with the other fingers, and then snapping, and then let's say a Russian up, and then doing a finger down. You see, I'm just slowly putting down the finger. Those are just a variety of slide in the first phrase.
There are lots of options, obviously.
There are even many more options, but for the purposes of a whole section of string players, or 15 string players, or 12 cellists doing a certain slide together, there's a certain element of fanciful slides that shouldn't be used,
right,
even though I use them all the time.
Give us one.
Well, there's a certain way to use to technically vary the speed of a slide. So instead of going all the same speed, you can go. You can start out slowly and then go faster, or go slow down as you get to the note.
Wow.
And that's very.
We don't use those in the orchestra, by the way.
That's a sort of a virtuosic element to create more of a vocal character, where you hear a soprano or a mezzo soprano or even a tenor going up, and the process of getting to the note is half the battle in terms of the expression.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the note itself. So if I went, the intensity that's created by saying, "Oh, we're almost there, like we're almost at the summit," creates this pathos, which is quite wonderful to play in solo music.
What's interesting, we're talking about slides, which I love and I use all the time. Most orchestras don't use slides much. Most conductors don't ask for them. Most sections nowadays in our country. If you listen to recordings from the early part of the 20th century, a famous one is with Mengelberg doing the Ein Heldenleben with the New York Philharmonic from I think 1924 or something in that neighborhood. You'd be shocked to hear the amount of slides and the kind of slides that they do, and how obvious and heart-wrenching they are, and how beautiful. Well, I do that in moderation, but lots of times nowadays, people just don't want any slides whatsoever.
There's a culture which is anti-slide, which is that there's a certain amount of technique that goes into avoiding slides, but there's also a lot more technique than that goes into creating expressive slides. And it's interesting to note as a conductor, as someone who's played in an orchestra with you, who has marked meticulously in the part what type of slide and when the slide should occur. It's very unifying, and it's very musical. But I've also been in orchestras where conductors have said, "Oh, I'd like you to put in slides." And that doesn't work so well, because if you have 12 cellos and one person makes a slide there and another person makes a slide there, there's a lack of unity in that approach. So what you were talking about Stokowski, individuality, there's actually, it's much more unifying if there's less individuality in terms of the orchestral string section playing, which I think is from this what I've observed in your approach.
So sometimes we change fingers on the same note.
Ah, sure.
And that creates a slide or a change of color just because of the thickness of the pads.
Sure.
Can you show us?
You said you only wanted to talk about a couple different types of slides, and
Well,
now we're talking about all the
this
slides.
is one of my favorites, though.
Okay, so what he's talking about is the process of playing the same note, but creating an extra emotion, which is re-articulating the same note by sort of making a fake sense of that you're going somewhere but staying. Right. So what he's talking about is changing the finger, which is that little thing like that. That can also be achieved by using the sort of the oscillation of, which is if you just sort of pull your finger back a little bit, and you can do that. Also, the distance between the fingers, if you go, it's much larger than if you go, same with, stuff like that, but then it gets a little very goopy. The same thing that you can do is when you play the same note on the different strings. Right. So if you take this note and you want to play it again, you can also do, which looks to the viewer that you're playing a higher note. But in fact, you're playing the same note on a lower string, but you can ascend to that same note. So visually,
a big color change.
It's a big color change.
Much more for it.
So. Right? So that's a different color, and it's also sort of visually odd for someone watching you because they're saying, where did that person go? Because the note's the same.
Okay. Now we're going to stick with slides for one more moment. But I'm going to talk about something we talk about along the orchestras. I'll say to a section, play that in position rather than shifting. So, for example, the famous cello part in the Mahler second that you can play with a whole bunch of different fingerings.
Right.
First, do it.
The soft one.
Huh?
The soft one.
The hard one. Yeah. You know that one? Do that one. I always give him a hard time. Just I don't prepare. You know.
So it's a.
Now that's one. For any of you that conducted this piece, that's a famous one where it's usually out of tune. So there's another way to do that. That's the way I like it. By the way, that's my favorite. But there's another way to do it, which is what I often do, which is in position. Do it in position.
Well, this is sort of a hard one because it's not exact.
Well,
I mean, if you
you're not shifting.
If you wanted to do it completely in position,
crossing three strings.
right? And of course, there's slurs, right? So inherently, if you cross a string, there is no slur, just for the purpose of
Accuracy.
If you cross a string on the same bow, it's no longer a slur because there's a break in the sound. So that's one thing. But if you cross multiple strings on a slur, so it's that ascension is a slur. So even though that works sort of in the position and you don't have to move anyway, that's what you mean. It's all sort of right there. Another way to do it, if you put your thumb. It's not a traditional position for the cello, but it means you don't have to shift anywhere. So.
That's really good. That's actually, for an orchestra, that's the best, I think.
Well,
it's called thumb position, because you see where he puts his.
But it's more expressive and it stays on the same string. So you're talking about strings as colors. So each string has a different color, right? Meaning that, especially on someone like the cello, we have the soprano voice, we have the alto voice, we have the tenor voice, and we have the baritone voice on the C string, or the bass voice, I guess, if you want. And we need to use all of these different voices, trying to keep them consistent within one phrase, because you don't want it to sound like you're yodeling, going in between different tessitura and different colors. So that's a reason to keep everything on the same string as much as possible all the time.
Some people are more obsessed with this idea. Sometimes everything that you do, when you do with an orchestra, gets amplified. So, for example, if you change strings with 10 cellos or 12 cellos, it'll be more audible than if you have one player trying to mask it and not make it. But there was one thing I did ask him to do beforehand, so I'm not springing this on him now. So you shouldn't think I'm always evil to my son. But I heard him play Schubert B-flat Trio last week. And they were there, and he did this.
He wanted me to do a different fingering.
No, I didn't. I like your fingering.
Okay.
But I've just asked him, do your fingering first.
So it's the second theme. So I'm traversing a large distance of the fingerboard for the purpose of keeping it all on the same string, so it all sounds like I'm a soprano or a mezzo, rather than what is most popular, which is. Which, as you can tell, there's one note in a certain
color,
brightness, and there's one So So what we do as instrumentalists to disguise that, we put more pressure and more weight on the lower string. So to make the difference less, but you can still hear it. So it sounds like you're yodeling a bit. So that's why. But of course, that is much
and then an
easier.
orchestra, that's the one we would use.
Which one is it?
You would stay in position, most likely, or maybe a combination of both.
Okay.
All right. Now, I want to talk a little bit about vibrato, because that's a big
Vibrato,
deal.
sure.
So first, just when you vibrate, do you vibrate above and below the pitch?
No. You buy well. Everybody. I mean,
I was
you
a trumpet player, and I used vibrato a lot. And I taught it, and I believe, and I only vibrated under the pitch.
Well, that is what I like to do, which is, I guess it's a everybody. I mean, I'm just telling you my own opinions, and you as telling your opinions. So I don't want to say that it's the right thing, but technically, when every oscillation of the vibrato, so the vibrato is altering the pitch, right? In some people, so some instruments you can just alter as much the amount of air you're using, but really it's you are actually taking the note and bringing the pitch down and bringing it back up. And every time you hit that note, the top of the amplitude is what you're going to, or the oscillation, is what the audience or the listener is going to feel is the note. Like you're whacking the note. Right? So if I want to play, and that's my vibrato, if I went on both sides of the note, going above the pitch and below the pitch, to me it sounds sharp. To me it sounds that the note is somewhere in the middle. But ideally, everybody that's listening would think that it's higher than the note.
We use that in new music sometimes.
Okay.
That's appropriate.
But you know, when you go to the opera and you hear a particular singer, and the width of the vibrato is so much that you have no idea what the actual note is, that gets very confusing, and that means that you're not getting that sort of rhythmic, I guess. But you know.
Okay. Now, give me generally speaking, on the lower strings, we use a little slower vibrato, on the upper strings a little faster vibrato.
Right.
That also means that if you're a baritone, you'll tend to use a vocal baritone, you'll tend to use a slower vibrato. If you're soprano, you tend to use a faster vibrato. It's just the way it sounds right. So give us
Right, so if which I think sounds nice, but if I were to go
too slow.
Well, it depends on what you're going for. I mean, in context, in general, faster, narrower vibrato. So if I were to play, that's the same width, but it sounds so much more wobbly because the distance that I'm using is covering many more notes. So as I get higher, the distance of the notes becomes smaller, and therefore, if I use the same amount of width in the vibrato, it's actually giving me a space of 2 whole steps as opposed to a quarter tone.
Okay. Now, let's talk about just some general. Again, we're dealing with a big subject that we could spend a lot more time, but I want to just touch on the most obvious things. This is now I'm speaking mostly orchestrally. The big problem we have in the orchestra is that string players vibrate late and they stop the vibrato before they change the note. So give me an example of that, doing it like just even a scale. Start late, stop, and then start. You can do it wrong, can't you?
I don't
work
know.
at it here.
Yeah, so starting the vibrato late would be, sorry. Stop it a little. So that means that we are grabbing a little bit at when we put each new finger down, and therefore we have a little bit of a tension, and we can't continue the vibrato consistently.
So now do it correctly.
So,
now, you can imagine, you get a whole string section starting vibrato late. What happens is, it sounds like a crescendo. It's unbelievable. Sometimes I'll hear a note in an orchestra, and I'll say, well, you're making a swell. Why are you making a swell on that note? And I'll look, and I'll see that they're vibrating late. And as a result, it starts a little softer, it gets a little louder.
Right.
And then the same thing happens before they change the note. So this idea of a constant vibrato is something that you really have to work at. Orchestra is very important.
and it's important to note that the vibrato is part of the sound, like any great singer. And we often, as string players especially, think about the vibrato as a color that you add to the sound that comes from the bow. But it's not, when you do not use vibrato, or when you stop the vibrato, it's jarring to the listener. It creates a completely different sound. So if I go, it's going in and out of a vocal sonority, so much so that for me it's a startling, and it's not so much putting in a special color on important notes. It's just a lack of a singing tone. When you play the trumpet in all of your trumpet records, you almost don't even notice it because it's so much part of the sound. But if you were to play one note even without it, it would sound jarring.
Now, that's not to say you shouldn't ever play non-vibrato. Of course you should. I mean, the music for strings, percussion, and celesta Bartók, that whole beginning, I always do without any vibrato, and it's eerie. It's a fantastic quality.
But that's an effect.
That's an effect.
That's an effect.
Okay.
And that should be used as an effect to jar or to startle, not to as part of a lyrical singing phrase of 19th century music.
And for those of you that you've probably all read my book, but there's a little section in there about vibrato in the 18th century, which people think that the composer said you should never vibrate, which is absolutely incorrect. But I won't do that lecture now. I'll just mention it. Now, my least favorite thing about that people do with vibrato, well, there are two things that really drive me crazy. Pet peeves, thank you. One is, many string players tend to not vibrate the top note of the phrase. They'll vibrate the next note. Give me an example of doing it incorrectly.
Incorrectly. So it would be like...
Do it again. That's very typical. Now, vibrate the top note. I mean, what a huge difference. The other thing is not vibrating the little notes. Now,
So
if you have fast notes, I mean, you can't vibrate those notes.
But at the same passage, this is a long note. So you would not. Right? So the little notes aren't vibrated because there isn't enough relaxation in the hand, and the hand isn't vibrating as a unit. So if the hand's in constant motion, you're never going to have an issue with that. But it's so if I do your two pet peeves in the same phrase, it can if you're listening,
It drives you crazy.
It can be difficult.
Play for me the Brahms E flat piano concerto, slow movement, cello solo.
Yeah.
And do it, and don't vibrate the little notes first.
So slow movement of the B flat piano concerto of Brahms, the cello solo. So to not vibrate the little notes, right?
Now vibrate the little notes. What a difference. I mean, it's amazing. Now, if this were an orchestral part and you have a whole section playing it, those non-vibrated little notes would just jump out. I mean, your ear gets, there's so many things that we've been talking about with bow speed and with vibrato and with changing, and when it becomes part of what you hear, I was discussing before we began a Mozart string quintet I heard on radio the other day, and the first violin was playing fast bow, slow bow. We had a discussion whether it's good or bad. That's a whole other issue. But I could hear it like that, showing what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So the passage was something like.
Now that could be a musical gesture, or it could be an affectation, because you're so used to playing fast bow, slow bow. So, and it's just these things.
So you would advocate
probably. I mean,
consistent
you have to
bow
think
speed.
about it musically, because let me just see. Okay, is there just a couple of quick questions? Any way to help loosen tension in your left hand?
Oh, as a question from a viewer.
Yeah.
So to loosen the tension in the left hand basically is usually the practice of realizing how little effort you need to actually press down the string. So on a cello, I can press down the string completely without any use of my thumb. Once I put the thumb on the back of the fingerboard, it should be so loose that there's no tension whatsoever. Once you feel like you need to grab, that's when you get into trouble. And you squeeze, and you can't vibrate, and you shift in a very clunky manner, and it can't be... See, there's even no use of the... But if I grabbed, it would be much
So it's really
more
about
difficult.
the position of the hand to make sure it's.
It's about the involvement of the thumb.
Something else I was going to ask you. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Do you vary the speed with which you put your fingers down?
Yes, absolutely.
A quick.
So, like we were talking about with the slides, where you can put down your fingers very slowly, right? So when you want to play a very machine-like passage, you want it to be like a typewriter. You want it to be like a saxophone, where you press down the keys and they're either down or they're not down. So, but if you were to play a lyrical passage with that type of
Articulation.
right, it wouldn't be as singing. So. If you put them down really slowly, sort of settle into
You
it.
can even do it on the saxophone. Sorry.
So on the
trumpet, I was always
on the
big
piano, on the piano,
Well, we can talk about it. Another time for the
on the organ, the harpsichord. The harpsichord. It's either down or it's not.
That's right. Harpsichord, guaranteed. You're absolutely right. Now, what about what strings do you use, and what are they made of? I mean, do we use steel strings? Do we use gut strings? What do we use?
Well, that was a question.
Yeah.
The strings I use I recently discovered, and I really do think they're the best out there, and they're called Perpetual by Perostro strings. And it's the whole set of medium strings. So basically most of us these days use steel strings as opposed to gut strings. It's said that gut strings have a warmer sound. Steel strings have a more direct sound. I find it easier to make the steel strings sound warm than to make the gut strings sound with a projecting tone. So if there's something I sacrifice, that said, with these strings I don't really need to sacrifice anything, but these strings have all the power without having as much tension as we usually use on the cello. So usually I've spent my whole life matching different types of strings. So I had one of each type of string at one time of different companies and different places. This is the first one I found as a set that really works for me. But every instrument responds to a different setup. It's just this is the first time I've been able to string up my cello with the exact same string on. Of course, they have different widths, and these bottom two are made of tungsten. Perostro makes them, and these top two are made of steel. And it really gives me I feel like I can. There's an element if I there's warmth there, but there's also a directness if I need it. The same with the or if I were to it can be very but also have that range of color.
Well, we got a lot more questions that I haven't gotten to. So, son, you're going to have to come back again.
No problem.
What a pleasure. Thank you all for being with us. It's been a joy and fun for me.